Welcome back to the Feel Great with Kate show. I am your host, Kaitlin Borncamp. I'm a CPA turned nutritional therapy practitioner, and I am on a mission to help more high achievers like you stop trading your health for your wealth so that you can die young as late in life as possible. And I'm really excited for our guest on today's episode because we're going to be talking all about a very effective way to actually do that. And spoiler alert, it doesn't take as much time as you might think. So we'll unpack all of that with our guest today, Brad Pitzele. He is the founder of 1000 Roads, and his journey started by navigating his own health issues, including autoimmune conditions, melanoma, and Lyme disease. And at one point, it was so bad he could barely walk. So that led him to develop some therapies to specifically support mitochondria function, and also are the same things that help support recovery, performance, and long-term health. So I think it'll be very relevant for all of you listeners. So Brad, thank you so much for being on the show. It's good to have you.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Kate.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your health journey and what brought you into the realm of oxygen therapy and red light therapy. How did you kind of stumble into that?
Well, I had to go the hard way, I suppose. I had some weird autoimmune and then other weird health things that started happening to me as early grade school. Most of them weren't super life impacting. They would kind of come and go. They might get a label and they go away. But then I started to develop autoimmune arthritis. It's probably about 15 years ago now, I suppose. Started going to the doctor, the rheumatologist, and put me on some drugs. Initially, they would help, and then they'd last about 6 months. And after they wore off, I'd be worse than where I started. And then they would double the dose or try a new medication, and it would help a little bit, never get as good as that first one, but it was kind of like taking stair steps down. And of course, when they wore off, I would even be worse. So after about 2 years of that, I developed melanoma, and melanoma was a known side effect of these drugs. So that was a really scary moment for me. I went back to my rheumatologist after I was diagnosed and said, "What do we do, doc? I kind of am in a rock and a hard place. Do I just stop taking these drugs and, die curled up in a ball from pain? Or do I keep taking these drugs and risk, getting cancer and dying?" And I was a young father at the time. I have 3 children. I think my youngest was probably maybe a year old, sort of thing. And his response was kind of flippant. It was like, "Look, we're just going to do another drug in the same class. It'll probably not be a problem." And I walked out of there, and that inner voice just was like screaming at me. It's like I could just see it. I was just imagining this future where I was lying in my hospital bed dying and remembering this conversation was the one when I just like, man, you should, so I knew I needed to do something different. That kind of kicked me off the traditional medical path and looking for alternative ways to improve my health. I always joke I'm a recovering engineer, so I started having a scientific mind. I just started digging through PubMed for research, started listening to holistic practitioners, started getting in groups of folks on the internet who were talking about their health journeys and health concerns and things that were similar to mine, and trying just about anything I could. I actually made a list the other day. There was like over 200 things I tried. I mean, we're talking diets, several diets, very restrictive, some weird stuff I have eaten, pills, supplements, different modalities, herbs, so many things. And nothing really helped tremendously until I went to see this doctor, and he asked that I get tested for Lyme disease. And I was like, I don't have Lyme disease. I was never bitten by a tick. I didn't have that bullseye rash thing they talk about. That wasn't me, but sure, I'll pay the money to get tested by this specific test that the insurance wouldn't cover, just to prove to the doctor I don't have it, so we can move on to the things that really matter. And lo and behold, it came back that I didn't just have Lyme disease. I had a co-infection called Bartonella. It's the infectious agent that causes cat scratch disease or cat scratch fever. And they often co-occur. And I didn't even believe it after I got the diagnosis. I went back to the doctor. I'm like, "What's the chances this is a false positive?" And he said, "Well, let me explain it to you like this. You have the DNA of these bacteria in your urine. What do you think?" And I was like, "Oh, I guess I have to accept it." So that was a high point, because I now had a label. I could start researching a label and talking to people who had that same label. And I felt like, oh, this will help me get closer to my solution, until I learned like Lyme disease is one of these like do it yourself diseases, which is not a lot of folks who are treating it. A lot of folks don't even believe it exists. It's like telling them you have a pet named Bigfoot, sort of thing. And like, so it became really difficult. And my health was really declining at this point. I'd gotten so bad. I had brain fog. I had no energy. I had pains in the back of my legs. I could felt like I'd just gotten done running an ultra marathon. Neuropathic burning pain. I had foot pain was actually the worst. I had this foot pain. The only way I can describe it to people is imagine someone beating the bottoms of your feet with a meat hammer and then having to walk on it. That was like every step. When I would get out of bed to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I had to put shoes on. I couldn't even walk to the toilet barefoot. It was that bad. So that was my low point. And then eventually I found my way to getting better, but that was what really led me to it. That was the impetus, I suppose.
Wow. Well, I empathize with you for going through that journey, and honestly, just being gaslighted by the doctors is
Yeah.
awful in that story, right? I mean, I think it just shows how important it is for us to take, personal responsibility, but also, like you said, it's like some of these things today, we have to be on our own journey. We have to be our own advocate. So I just empathize that you were able to do that for yourself. And so in that list of 200 different modalities and things that you tried, Brad, I'm assuming on that list was red light and oxygen at some point.
Yeah. So my doctor, same one who diagnosed me with Lyme, said, you got to look into mitochondrial health. And nowadays you'll hear people talking about mitochondrial health a bit more. 10 and 15 years ago, no one was talking about it. And so one of the things he recommended for it was exercise with oxygen therapy, which is something I had never heard of, and probably your listeners have never heard of. And it's exactly what it sounds like. You exercise while you've got a mask on that you're breathing near pure oxygen. You breathe 93% oxygen versus right now in the room, you're probably breathing 21% oxygen. So a massive supplement of oxygen. And that was one of the first things that kind of really started to turn the tides for me. And then after I had done that for a few months, I later added red light therapy, and I kind of toyed around with that for a while. And eventually I was able to kind of find a sequence to use these two together, and it really catapulted my recovery. But the funny thing is the exact same things that are happening in our body and disease, they're very much related to what happens to us naturally as we age. And so everyone's going through this same process. So yeah, through these sorts of tools, I was able to reverse a lot of my health decline, pretty much all of it. But also through this company, I was able to help a lot of folks reverse even like premature aging and so forth.
Wow. Well, I know when the first time I heard of EWOT was like actually being used, and not some like, far out biohacking thing that I'll never have access to, but I had heard it used. I actually met a functional doctor, and she worked at a clinic where it was a cancer clinic. So they were treating patients with cancer all around the country. And one of the modalities was he would have people come in and use an EWOT, the
Yep.
exercise with oxygen therapy, like mask over. She's telling me we have them doing the bike and the elliptical and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like, what's the relevancy of breathing in oxygen? I mean, other than it's good for you, but why the exercise? And so that was the first time I had heard about it. And then that was probably 5 years ago. And of course, my ears perked up because I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Similar to what you just said, even though they were using it for cancer patients, I knew that whatever is going to help somebody's body become strong enough and healthy enough to overcome cancer is also going to be good for just like a normal, resilient human like myself. So I've been interested in it ever since. But tell us, Brad, like, is EWOT only for people with cancer or autoimmune conditions?
No, there's so much research. You're right about cancer and oxygen. In the 1920s, there was a gentleman who won the Nobel Prize, Otto Warburg, for showing that he can make any cell a cancer cell by depriving it of oxygen. And the reverse is true. You'll find the survival rates of folks who have tumors is directly related to how much oxygen is in that tumor. So really, really an interesting link that doesn't get enough light of day. But a lot of folks are using it for cancer. A lot of folks are using it for all sorts of chronic health conditions. But then we have folks using it for general wellness and for longevity improvement. And we also have a third group of folks who's using it for performance enhancement. It's a really big athletic performance enhancer. A lot of research done by Olympic teams, the US and the Russian Olympic teams specifically, on what it does there. But it's amazing how many things oxygen does for your body. And actually, EWOT and red light both work on a principle of helping with oxygen in one form or another. EWOT's about delivering more oxygen to your tissues. And all the benefits, if you hear about red light, there's tens of thousands of pages of research on it. All the benefits come down to generally allowing the mitochondria to use more oxygen. And so that's why you pair them together. One's about delivering the oxygen to the mitochondria, and the other is about forcing the mitochondria to leverage this oxygen to produce more energy. The mitochondria are like the little parts of our cells that produce the energy, right? Like these are the things that produce the fuel that every time you flex a muscle, have a thought, you digest food, all of it takes energy, and that energy is produced by the mitochondria. And they have two ways of producing energy. They have aerobic respiration where they use oxygen plus glucose. And for every molecule of glucose that they process, they can produce up to 38 units of energy called ATP. Then when they run out of oxygen, and as we age, we all have issues with oxygen delivery and utilization, they have a backup generator. They can produce energy directly from the glucose without oxygen. It's called anaerobic respiration. But the problem with anaerobic respiration is it only produces 2 units of energy for that same molecule of glucose, so like 5% of the energy. So it truly is a backup generator. And it also produces a lot more metabolic waste. So if you've ever been working out really hard and the next day you were really sore and stiff, that was lactic acid, and that lactic acid was caused from anaerobic respiration. You ran out of oxygen in those cells, and so your body switched to the backup generators and spit out all this lactic acid. And so that's why oxygen is so critical, because it can 20x the amount of energy our cells have, and that allows our cells to work at their best.
Yeah, I love that explanation. And when our cells are working at our best, not only does it become anti-cancerous in some of those studies, helping with autoimmune condition, but it also, that is involved in every single process that our body is doing. So I love the differentiator there that you made between getting in the oxygen, but also then the utilization of the oxygen, because that's a point that I speak about on nutrition, which is part of my journey. Was I thought I was eating the perfect amount of food. I thought that was it. I thought I just needed to eat right and move my body, which is like, 1 + 1 = 2. And then it wasn't until years later somebody explained to me, it doesn't matter how much nutrition you're eating or perfect macros you're eating if you're not digesting your food. And I was like, whoa, what's digestion?
Yep.
I was like, I'd never heard of this before. And then come to find out, my digestion was significantly impaired from 15 years of being on the birth control pill, which I'm still working to repair right now. So on that note, I actually wanted to ask you a personal question, Brad. Like, would the EWOT therapy actually help somebody like me heal my gut lining?
Yeah, it definitely can, because when you're talking about that, you have likely inflammation in your gut lining, right? So our gut is lined with these cells called endothelial cells. And without getting too deep, endothelial cells are all over our body. They're gatekeepers. They're like the bouncer at the bar. They let some things through and not other things. In your gut, it allows the digested nutrients to exit, and the undigested and the waste products remain inside our digestive system. We also have them in our circulatory system, and they're the components that allow the nutrients and the oxygen out of the circulatory system, but doesn't let all of our blood just leak out into our body cavity. And so the founding of EWOT, there was a gentleman who did a bunch of research in the 60s and 70s, and he found all of us have our endothelial cells in our circulatory system. They become more and more inflamed, right? And so as they become inflamed, it does a couple things. One, it causes a drop in oxygen delivery to our tissues. So this isn't a disease state. This is happening to all of us naturally as we age, particularly in Western society, where we have this thing we call inflammaging, where we're all just supposed to get more and more inflamed. And he found that by doing EWOT, you create a powerful anti-inflammatory impact, right? So, and he was able to reopen the blood vessels and reestablish normal blood flow. So all of your cells downstream were getting oxygen, not just when you were doing the EWOT, but also for days and weeks after you'd done the sessions. And the interesting research is in the link between inflammation and oxygen. And so this is where this ties back to you. Anywhere in your body you have inflammation, you have the medical term is hypoxia. It means oxygen starvation. It's just a fancy term. So you cannot have inflammation without oxygen starvation. And anywhere you have oxygen starvation, you have inflammation. Those two have to coexist. It's just the nature of things. And so when you can reestablish normal oxygenation to those tissues, you can turn off and turn down the inflammation.
Yeah, and for me, just thinking about that, I'm like, I can use less inflammation in my knee, in my elbow. I mean, like in my brain, right? It's not just in one localized spot, which I think is what's really cool about the delivery and the mechanism of something like your EWOT machine is that you breathe it in, and so your body is going to send that extra oxygen everywhere, and particularly extra where it needs it. And so the body is so like smart and wise like that.
It is.
So, yeah, I'd love to kind of double click down, Brad, on like what is the device? Like tell us about what you created with 1000 Roads and kind of how you would recommend using it. Like if I was to get one delivered tomorrow, you'd be like, here, Kaitlin, do this, this, and this. Tell me what to do.
So the way it works is the system involves a few different components. The first component is something called an oxygen concentrator. It's a device. You plug it in the wall, you turn it on, and it purifies the room air into 93% oxygen. So from 21 to 93%. So it can produce essentially an endless supply of oxygen, right? And so you don't have to buy oxygen tanks or refill anything. The only challenge with it is there's two units we sell, one that produces 5 liters of oxygen every minute and the other that produces 10. Now, when you're exercising, you can use a massive amount of oxygen. You could breathe in 50 or 60 liters in a minute. So these machines won't keep up with you. So what we do is we take this machine and we fill this large buffer, what we call a reservoir. And it's 1,000 liters. So if you think about a 2-liter bottle of soda, it's like 500 of those, right? It's 1,000 liters of oxygen. We fill it up. It looks like a big balloon, and it's like 6 feet wide, 5.5 feet tall. And we attach a hose to it, and we attach that hose to a mask. Here's like a mask I have right here. And you just hook a hose onto it, and you breathe through it while you're exercising. And so it's actually really simple. When you look at it first, folks get intimidated, but usually folks, if that box was sitting in front of you, Kait, you'd have it unpacked and set up in like 15 minutes or less. And the protocol is actually really simple too. Now, you got to think about this. We've designed this for folks who are dealing with chronic illness, not just healthy people. So it needs to be really simple. People who are dealing with brain fog, memory issues. So it's incredibly simple to use. You flip a switch that fills the reservoir, you put the mask on, hook up the hose, and then you do 15 minutes of cardiovascular exercise. That's all it takes to get the benefits. And you do it about, I prefer to have folks do it, if you can, work yourself up to 3 to 5 times a week. So it's not intense. Usually, as far as exercise intensity goes, we're not looking for HIIT. We're not looking for personal records. We're looking to increase your circulation and get your blood flowing. A sweet spot I find is that people normally work up to is like 70 to 80% of their theoretical max heart rate. That's a nice moderate exercise. If you go too far, too intense, you start to develop a lot of oxidative stress on the body, which I think negates some of the benefits. So we try to stay in that sweet spot where we've got elevated circulation while you're breathing the oxygen.
Okay, so 15 minutes a couple times a week. I'm glad you explained the downside if you do it too intense, because the way my competitive brain works, Brad, is I'm like, I'm going to start using this oxygen machine. I'm going to set some new PRs on my Peloton.
And you know what? You will set, over time, you will set PRs. The interesting thing about exercise, the very first thing I noticed when I started doing exercise with oxygen therapy is the exercise is easier. So for me, I got on my elliptical machine like I normally do and set it to 12 and started going. In my first session, I'm like, I feel like I'm not getting a workout. 13, 14. So I did it at 14. My second session, I'm like, 14 is not enough. 15. And today I do it at like 17 out of 20 resistance. And I don't feel like I'm like killing it. I'm still like the same level of effort. So you will set PRs without intending it. So I started when I was very, very sick. A year later, I went back to my doctor's office. He was shocked at how much better I was. He asked if I'd start making for his patients, and that was the birth of the company. He also asked me if I would do this. He had this fancy new testing machine called a bioenergy test, where it was testing your mitochondrial function, the age of your body based on several energy parameters, and your VO2 max. And for your listeners who don't know, VO2 max is like the penultimate metric for your endurance capabilities. So it literally stands for the volume of oxygen, the maximum volume of oxygen you can intake. So the more oxygen you can intake, the more you can exert energy, the more you can exercise. And so elite athletes, they've got really high VO2 max. And they put me on this machine and measured my VO2 max. And the lady says to me, she's like, hey, so you'll do this till failure is what she called it. And that was like your heart rate and your breathing rate get above a certain threshold, and then they call it failure. She's like, that'll take like 8 to 12 minutes. It'll get progressively harder. And I started doing it in 8 minutes, nothing, 12 minutes, nothing. It took, 20 minutes, still nothing. It was like 22 or 26 minutes. I can't remember exactly what. I got off and she's like, are you like an ultra endurance athlete or what's going on here? And I'm like, no, I just do EWOT like a few times a week in my garage.
That's awesome. I love that. You're like soft flex when you impress your doctor.
Yeah. Well, and the VO2 max that came back, I was like top 5% for my age group, which was kind of shocking because, I'd started this barely able to walk sort of thing.
Wow. In 1 year time. Yeah. I'm curious, have you done that type of VO2 max testing recently now that you've had a couple years under your belt?
I haven't. That was a decade ago. I've thought about it from time to time. I should find some time and do it again.
Just for fun,
Yep.
for fun. That would be some good, like healthy competition on some social media content. Like, hey, tag some professional athletes.
Right.
Oh man, I'm just way too competitive if you couldn't tell, but I like to keep it fun. I like to keep it for a purpose. So I wanted to ask you too, Brad. So is there a story behind the name of your company, 1000 Roads? Tell us about that.
Yeah. My healing journey was tough. And the thing I learned, you spend a lot of time talking to other folks who are sick. Something works for somebody, it doesn't work for somebody else. And the thing is, everyone's wellness journey is their own. And it was paying homage to the fact that, everyone's going to have their own journey. And so it's not one size fits all. And also it came from the goal that when I was at my sickest, I promised my maker, myself, anyone who I thought might listen, that if I ever got better, I would pay it forward and try to help 1,000 other folks, recover, maintain their health. And so it was an homage to that as well.
Oh, wow. Well, I really resonate with that because I have seen in the health space with some of the clients I've worked with, and I couldn't agree more that it is a unique journey for every single person. And I wanted kind of taking a step back here for like, if we were to say, yeah, but Brad and Kaitlin, there's 100 other options for me on the market, or there, which thing do I do? How is this different than another supplement? Or going back to your list of 200 things that actually do create differences in your body, but it just depends on what your body needs at that time and at that stage and at that, amount and concentration. And what I really like about the two products that, 1000 Roads makes is the EWOT with the oxygen delivery and then the red light therapy devices is it's getting at like the core. It's if you were to reduce all the mechanisms of action, which is just scientific speak for like what is it actually doing, if you were to reduce all of the effectiveness or the return on investment, it's like these are two of the therapies that are just foundational. And like we said before, when you do give your body more oxygen, it knows what to do with it, and it returns itself in health like tenfold or more.
Well, people can intuitively get this. So if you think about it, you don't have as much energy as you did when you were 25. You might notice your joints ache or your body stiffer than it was. You don't feel as quick on your feet. You can't think as clearly. And as you get older, you notice more and more of that. And we think of that as like this natural progression that's supposed to happen to us when we age. It occurs actually because our mitochondria have less energy because primarily oxygen delivery. And to your point, there's a lot of science behind why that happens. And that was like the thing I really grabbed onto when I was really sick is like, well, geez, if I could improve my oxygen delivery, that in and of itself can improve things. And so, we always hear folks come back to us and tell us better sleep, memory improvements, pain going away, like clearer head, that sort of thing. And so they're kind of shocked because they didn't think that was possible. But like, we don't have to accept some of this decline, right? There's a part that we all are going to die someday. Like this won't make you live forever, obviously. But the point is, to your point, how can you stay as young as long as possible? And one of
Yes.
those things is if we can keep your oxygen status and your mitochondria energy production as high for as long as possible, then you will feel more youthful, because when your cells have energy, they repair, they regenerate, they're able to do whatever their job is at its peak.
Yeah. So if we were talking about, the protocol and using this, like I always think about some of these modalities as like a return on investment, one of money and
Mm-hmm.
one of time. And I think if we were to just anchor in on the time perspective, I was actually surprised a little bit earlier when you shared, hey, the protocol would be 15 minutes a couple times a week. I'm like, that's it? Like, it looks like this, it sounds like this huge extreme, like new thing that would take thousands of hours or whatever. Because I guess the only other comparison I've seen somewhat similar on the market, which I know is different, we can unpack those differences, would be something like a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. And that's going to be today, it's only available as a medical device for one of the main reasons being that hyperbaric oxygen, you need the pressurized system. So, for that reason, the infrastructure of the actual unit has to be really strong. Sometimes it's steel. Anyway, it's this gigantic machine. It's really loud. During my research, I'm like, yes, that's going to be the next device I buy. And I was talking with a few other people about like, we can split it and keep it at one of our houses. Like, let's just like crowdsource this, right? And of course, it's like $30,000 to $50,000. I'm like, okay, one day, right? Like, I just need 5 other people, and we'll each drop 10K. Like, this is how my mind works. But where I was going with that is, one, your device, specifically the EWOT, is much more approachable in terms of price. But let's focus more on the time piece. So could I just do this, Brad, if I was just watching TV? Can I just habit stack and just lay on the couch and breathe in some extra oxygen? Would I get the same results? Or talk
No,
to me about that.
yeah, that's a good question. So, I think the best way to explain it is comparing it to hyperbaric oxygen. To your point, most folks have heard of that, and maybe they've heard of some of the benefits. And hyperbaric, by the way, is a great therapy, and it's really good for certain situations. The challenge with hyperbaric, because I was looking at it before I started EWOT, was very expensive. To your point, either you're paying $30,000 and $50,000 to buy what's called a soft shell chamber, or you're using the hard shell one, which has higher pressure in a doctor's office for $300 to $500 a session, and then
Yeah.
you're spending an hour or an hour and a half inside there once you get it pressurized. So it's I think it's really good heroically. If you're going to do it for several sessions, maybe even several weeks, but you really can't do that for several months on end. Most folks don't have several hours every day to
Right.
dedicate to that. What we do when we do EWOT is we're hijacking all the physiological changes that happen in your body with exercise. So when you start exercising, your body immediately recognizes it needs more energy. And the gating factor for more energy isn't more food in America, right? We all get plenty of food. It's oxygen, and specifically oxygen delivery. And so you start breathing deeper and faster. Your lung membrane actually thins out to allow more oxygen to penetrate into your blood. Your heart starts beating faster and deeper. Your blood vessels dilate, and your blood pressure goes up, which forces more oxygen out of the blood and into the tissue. And so when you start breathing oxygen while you're doing that, you're able to take in a massive amount of oxygen. So 1,000 liters in a reservoir, you could take that in 15 minutes. And that's like the same amount of oxygen you would take in a full day, right? So it's a
Oh, wow.
massive amount. And because of all those synergies, the vasodilation, the increased blood pressure, the faster heart rate, your circulation is up. Your body is like primed and ready to take this oxygen in. So what happens when you take in a large amount of oxygen, whether it's hyperbaric or EWOT, is your red blood cells that normally carry your oxygen, they're tapped out. They're near 100%. There's not significant room for more oxygen. So you're not getting a whole lot more. But your blood plasma normally doesn't carry much oxygen. Your blood plasma is this clearish liquid that the red blood cells ride on. It's the liquid part of the blood. And when you breathe a high concentration of oxygen in either of these therapies, it actually drives some of that blood plasma oxygen into the blood plasma. And that's important because blood plasma is like 1,000 times thinner than a red blood cell. And it can get to parts of your circulatory system that are choked off due to inflammation, due to aging, due to sickness, etc., and cause that anti-inflammatory effect that reestablishes normal youthful blood flow. So that's
Yeah.
why you want to pair it with exercises, because you're increasing oxygen uptake. You're also driving it into the plasma.
Super interesting about the plasma. Yeah, because that's something I was curious about is, when I wear my Garmin and it does the basically like pulse oximeter, whatever it's called, where it's measuring my blood oxygen level. And, I'm pretty healthy. So usually it's around 95, 96, 97%. So what you're saying is the goal isn't necessarily to get your blood oxygen level to like 100%. That's not really what we're getting here. It's actually a couple of other things that the pulse ox isn't measuring, such as the plasma. Do I have that right?
That's right. You won't actually be able to measure much of the difference through your pulse ox because what it's literally measuring is what percentage of your red blood cells have oxygen being carried on them. And so because if you're at 95 or 98 or whatever you are, yeah, there's not a lot of room for more oxygen there. You might go up a little bit. What the real power is at driving it into our blood plasma and creating this whole new vehicle for carrying oxygen in our body.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying before about the mitochondria, I mean, just to connect the dots here, is that what we know about red blood cells is that there is no mitochondria. So while your pulse ox is measuring your red blood cell oxygen level, you actually want more oxygen where the mitochondria, which is every other cell of the body, like your liver cell, your brain cell, your skin, everything.
So right.
I find it so fascinating because this really helps my mind like think through the cascade of levels of where should people be spending their time, their money, how will it help them? And again, just coming back to the same conclusion, which is that this is so foundational to the body's function, and that when you give it the right inputs, people will be really surprised that the body wants to be in balance, like how fast healing can happen, how much faster recovery from workouts and increasing performance, like you said, increasing your VO2 max. Like, I love that. I'd love to understand too, you shared a little bit about it, but what are some of the, the most surprising transformations you've seen from people, or has anything, kind of out of the ordinary that you've seen over the years from people using these devices?
So, I had a gentleman who was stage 4 cancer, said he was never going to walk again, came back to me a few months after using it and tell me how he just got done walking 6 months and he's going to write a book about his protocol and how he cured himself for cancer. And like, this was such a big part. I had another gentleman who had a CTE, which is concussions, several concussions. And so he was a tax accountant. You'll appreciate that. And he was doing people's taxes, but he had all this brain fog. He couldn't focus. He had anger issues, which often occur with CTE, and behavioral issues, and couldn't focus in the afternoon. So he couldn't do his job, and he, like, after one session, he was shocked. He's like, the rest of the day I felt clear headed. Next day it kind of came back. I was back at my baseline, but after a few weeks, it was like he would do it every other day. And he's like, I was good. And like, he's like, I can't believe it. But, he's a few weeks in, he's like, I feel like my old self, sort of thing. I've seen people coming back from long COVID, Lyme disease. We actually are helping folks with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, just so many. At the root of every chronic illness and at the root of aging is inflammation. We all know this. That's all everywhere. And when you're able to do something that treats inflammation and also is a strong detoxifier like oxygen is and EWOT is, you can get some amazing things. And, a lot of it's also, so inflammation builds up as we get older, right? And so that's something that's not necessarily inevitable. You can fight that. We can fight that through diet and lifestyle, but we can also fight that directly through oxygen supplementation like we're doing here. But it seems like everything that's happening in society, it's like there's more and more insults to fight against, right? And one of those insults is actually LED lights. So when we switched from incandescent lights, well, first, we used to be this creature that was outdoors all the time, and we were absorbing the sun's energy, which is full spectrum, everything from UV to infrared, everything. And then we moved indoors and we were using incandescent lights, but they still had a lot of the spectrum. And then we went to LEDs and we purposefully cut out all the reds and near infrareds because they generate heat. And so we see that as energy inefficient. We want more of these blues and yellows. And so most of us are actually deprived of red light as a signaling source. It actually directly talks to our mitochondria and tells it to produce energy. We see a lot of reds in the morning when we wake up and it makes us alert. And we see a lot of reds in the evening and it allows us to produce more melatonin and become sleepy. And now here we are staring at blue screens with blue lights and we're deprived of it. So it's kind of cool because we're really just trying to restore the body to more of a natural state. One of the things that hit me is there's so much you can do. And when I was really sick, I was trying so much. I refer to it as the ceremonies, counting pills, doing modalities, doing sauna, whatever it was, detox protocols. It took up so much of my life. And then you kind of get to a point where you just like, oh, this is too much. And there was a couple things for me to your point, like it was really time efficient. I could do both of these in less than a half hour. I used to work out for a half hour, so it became a net time savings. And the other thing I looked at the beginning before I was so confident was like, well, what happens if I do too much of this? Like, what's the downside of it? I'm like, it's just oxygen, it's just light sort of thing. There wasn't a major downfall to either one of those,
Right.
in the ways we were doing them.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that so much. There is downsides to things. I mean, I learned that the hard way with CrossFit, which was like my
Ooh.
first kind of gateway into health. I thought, I was like, one, it got me way more into weightlifting and wanting to build my strength, which was great. But yeah, I found myself, I think I was 25, going to 6 months of PT for my knee, then another 6 months of PT for my shoulder. And I was like, I am so young. I should not be like beating myself up. Something you mentioned, I want to kind of go back to, which is kind of like the greater powers that be. And I really do think that our modern society, our modern lifestyle is one of the main things that makes it hard to be healthy today.
Yeah.
And I say that for, creating the context that we are really smart people. We want to do what's right. We want to do what's best for ourselves, our family, the people we love. So why is it that so many of us are unhealthy? Like, I think the easy answer is a lot of people say, oh, it's just, people are fat, dumb, lazy, stupid. It's like, no, actually quite the opposite. And I was really surprised when I started coaching. I simply thought it was just an ignorant problem, like not in a bad way, but I was like, oh, like people haven't learned what I learned. People don't know how important nutrition is. People don't know what to eat. But actually, I find that 9 times out of 10, they already know the first 5 things that they could or should be doing. They just can't bring themselves to do it, or they have a mental block around how it could possibly fit into their lifestyle. And so I'd love to just take a step back and kind of talk about the larger picture, because I know, Brad, when you and I were chatting before, you had shared with me a little bit about your experience in Washington, D.C. And so if we could just touch on that for a moment, and,
Sure.
what is your take around some of the powers that be and their impact and influence on Washington, D.C.?
Well, my oldest daughter has special needs, and when she was born, I did a lot of special needs advocacy work, and in doing that, got to talk to a lot of legislators, a lot of their staff. Got to spend time in Washington D.C. in their offices, and one of the things that was so shocking to me was that every single lobbyist I spoke to, every single one had spent some part of their career, usually a large part of their career, in the pharmaceutical industry, bar none. And that's just the facts. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry by itself is an industry that when they get a patent, they basically get a mini monopoly, right? And so when you have a monopoly, you can get monopoly profits. And so when you have monopoly profits, you want to invest that in two things. One, a new monopoly, a new drug. And two, making sure that the rules that give you monopolies are still tilted in your favor. So it was shocking how much of the lobbying industry is populated by people who are, or were related to the pharmaceutical industry.
Mm. Yeah, I find that really curious as a CPA for 2 reasons. One, because my mind always goes to incentives. I started my career in tax accounting. And so a life lesson I learned is, what are the incentives that are being put in place? And obviously taxes
Yeah.
are one way that the government incentivizes certain transactions and activities. So that makes sense. But the other reason it is interesting to me is because as a CPA, we have to uphold ourselves to the utmost independence requirements, even such that, yes, you can't, you can't actually own like stock in the company that you're doing the books for, things like that. But even higher than that, you can't even have the illusion of lack of independence.
Yeah.
And so I just find it really interesting for an industry with money, like accounting, finances, the SEC, all these public companies, they're 10K. When we're talking about money, we have to have these really stringent independence rules. But when we're talking about actual medicines and drugs and the literal healthcare system for people's lives, why are we not upholding the same independence requirements?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they'll argue other things like we're helping people. We're helping people, and like we're trying to get it to market faster so we can help more people. And then you can just you bring someone up and they're like, yeah, grandma's dying, I want this drug approved, and they do because they care about grandma and they don't know what else options they have for her. And so it's easy to have that very emotional appeal. And and here's the facts of the matter. our legislator is elected, House of Representatives every 2 years, senators every 6 years. So there's a group of 500 or 600 folks in this country who make decisions for all of us, that group of legislators. That's an incredible amount of power for the most powerful country in the history of the world. And they don't make that much for how much power they have. They make $180,000 or $200,000, which sounds like a lot, but it's not for someone who's one of the most powerful people in the world when you get down to it. So anytime you give a human, any human, I'd say, that much power and not that much income, and they have to stand for re-election where they need money to get reelected, even if it's not for someone to put an addition on their house. They literally just need to get back to this office and probably in their heads to continue doing the people's good work. Like that, there's a lot of ability to influence these folks structurally. There's just nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, we also learned that about in accounting, the fraud triangle, which is all the things that make up the opportunity for fraud. It's like pressure, opportunity, and I forget what the third piece is. But yeah, it's like exactly what you're saying. The environment is not conducive to honest people, not in the sense that the people themselves are bad, but that the situation is not the most supportive for mass decisions.
Nothing is black and white in this world. Everything is gray. And so anytime something looks bad, you can also repaint it and say, yeah, but look at who this is helping and why this is important. And so if you want to justify it either to yourself or to somebody else, there's always justification to be had in a lot of these things. But yeah, you've got, the challenge is you have way more pharmaceutical companies up there on the hill talking about what they want to do versus, let's say, people who have health conditions up there advocating for their own needs, right? And so when you have that situation and the pressure of legislators to take campaign donations to get reelected in 2 or 6 years, well, like the saying that was always said to us when we were advocating was, if you're not at the table, you're what's for dinner.
Oof.
Yeah. I think
that really paints a picture as to how things kind of go down. But yeah, it was interesting when I started doing some more research. Like, I really find I'm interested in the intersection of what is good for us humans, like nutrition, all the things we know we could be doing and how we evolved versus like our modern lifestyle and our current decisions as consumers. And one of those kind of levers that I think about is advertising, both on TV, but just in any form of media. And I was really surprised to learn one day, I was like, why isn't there just more advertisements for whole foods and exercise and just these like really basic ways of living? Like, I'm like, surely if these state organizations and these not-for-profits and maybe even some of these companies who want to do good, I mean, they have the means and it'd be really easy. Like, we have the information. It's not a question anymore of like the top 10 things we should do to just have a healthy life, right?
I was having this thought myself the other day. I saw this label on a package that said no trans fats. And I started thinking about this. I'm like, when I was a kid, carbs were good, fats were bad. Don't eat fats. We had no fat everything, right? They carved everyone up. Stay away from fats. And then it's flipped now where it's carbs. Carbs are bad, more fats, more proteins. And I almost feel like the food industry creates their own boogeymen. If they create the trans fat thing, then we're all looking, oh, trans fats are the new enemy. We can't have trans fats, while they're putting some other chemical in over here. They're like, yeah, no trans fats. They got something on the package that says, people are like, oh, no trans fats, healthy, right? You're like,
well, in a very real way. I mean, we're seeing a lot of great changes happening really fast right now. I think at a faster time than history on things like food labels for the benefit of consumers, finally. And at the same time, to your point, I mean, there are huge lobbying groups that are making sure, even though there are changes, that they get rolled out in like a time so that the big companies can still profit from it, so that they don't lose too much money changing out those SKUs and changing out those ingredients. Because what a lot of people don't think about is, anything that has a food label, I mean, any product, but specifically food here, I mean, that's going to cost money to change the manufacturing process. It's going to cost money to change the ingredients. It's going to cost money to change the labeling. You also have to factor in, like, if you have brand loyal consumers expecting a certain taste of products, oh gosh, we can't lose our, patented taste or whatever the heck it is. And it's like, can we just get back to eating food, please?
It's hard. I mean, you hear the stories that, for grain, when they're drying grain now, they just spray like Roundup, the stuff that we know causes cancer.
To dry it. Wow.
If consumers knew that, they'd say, hey, I'll pay an extra 12 cents. Just let it sit out in like the sun, maybe a couple of days.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, and something I would say tying this all together, especially with the concepts we've talked about here with your products, Brad, is that a lot of things in the health space are now like they used to be like on the forefront 10, 20 years ago where like the cost was really high. And now I'm so grateful that enough people have adopted it and more products like yours, I'm excited to try, are way more approachable and affordable. And so to that extent, I would just say anything that, any listeners thinking about like, oh, like they're griping about the price of like that grass-fed beef. I'm like, yes, today. But I always like to think I'm kind of like that, early adopter style where I'm like, I'd gladly pay maybe even up to 2 times the price if I know it's going to be the highest quality and like it's verified, grass-fed, higher nutrition, whatever it is, because I know that I have the means. I'm really grateful for that. And at the same time, it's going to become more affordable if the consumer base, like if all of us continue to vote with our dollar, we continue to buy these really higher quality products, the manufacturing will adjust to the consumer demands.
It's so true. When I was really sick, I was on, at one point, I was on like what was called the paleo autoimmune protocol diet, incredibly restrictive. And you had to prepare everything from scratch, which made it really difficult. And to your point, as people move more towards getting out of grains or other things or reducing carbohydrates, it becomes more approachable. Or you can go to a Walmart and get organic vegetables, which you couldn't, you were going to a specialty. So as the demand for health and healthy products is more, it becomes more accessible.
Absolutely. I agree. Well, Brad, it's been so great to have you on the show. Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can go to our website. It's 1000roads.com/Kait, Kait, and the one in 1000 Roads is spelled out like the sign behind me.
Awesome. And we'll also link that here in the show notes for anybody who wants to check out Brad's awesome products, the EWOT, and also some of the red light devices. Well, thank you so much, Brad, for the company that you created, and really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Kait. I appreciate it.
Just a reminder that the information shared on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended to be medical advice. It should not be used to treat, diagnose, or cure any medical condition. Always consult your physician or qualified healthcare provider before making changes to your health regimen or medications. Kaitlin Borncamp and Health Supply LLC, DBA Feel Great with Kait disclaim any liability for outcomes resulting from the use of this content.